Hey everybody, it's Kyle. Hey, today I want to talk briefly about the autism roller coaster. And you may have heard this term, maybe you'll be familiar with it, I'm sure, after I talk about it. But how painful and discouraging it can be, and then the long-term effects it can have on our kids. So if you're not familiar with the autism roller coaster, it simply goes like this. You know, we get so much joy out of simple, very simple things with some of our kids on the spectrum. And, you know, it's almost like you work towards those joyous moments. And it's like going up the roller coaster when it's click, 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 right? And you get to the very top of the peak and you look around and it's just kind of exhilarating. I mean, you can see so far and it's so exciting. And then you start going down the other side and it's just scary as crap. And it's just frightening. And it can be just horrible on us. And you know, I'll give you a couple of examples from our experience when we were on the autism roller coaster. I remember the first time I coerced somehow my son into telling his mom, "I love you." And this was a pretty momentous occasion. I mean, he through broken English, he said it to my wife. And I'm telling you, we both broke down into tears because he was probably 6 or 7 years old before we heard those words. And, you know, we were at the peak of the autism roller coaster. And 2 days later, during an incredibly hard meltdown on him, he smashed his head through a plate glass window. And I recall, as I was holding him still while they were putting stitches in his head, thinking that it was just so hard to remember that peak of that roller coaster, because the hard times, you know, the bottom and the going down that hill into the meltdowns and the biting and the screaming and the loneliness was so difficult. Or a few years later, I guess he was probably maybe 9 or 10, or he was about 9 when we finally potty trained him. And being on the peak of that autism roller coaster. And then less than a week later, he made a violent run at my wife and I and tried to hurt us. And I think a lot of our families go through this very consistently. And, you know, it didn't occur to me how damaging the stress and strain was. I knew how hard it was on us, my wife and I, and my typical kids, but I never imagined the stress and strain and what kind of damage it could be doing to my son on the spectrum until I was asked to speak at a conference a few years later. And after I was done speaking, I didn't know it, but in the back of the room, there were 3 young men who were adults now on the spectrum and at different levels of functionality. And afterwards, the one who I guess was the highest functioning, walked up to me, and through broken English and through a little effort, he was able to tell me, "I wish my parents knew what you were teaching when I was little." And, you know, it kind of surprised me, so I said, why is that? And he said, because then they would have been happy. And, you know, I was able to have a conversation with him where he expressed to me that the stress and strain that was in their home was so difficult on him and his parents that he thought it was him. And he thought it was autism. And he came to the conclusion that he was the reason for their unhappy family. And he thought they were unhappy because of all the stress and strain. And he said, he even told me that he wished he'd never been born, because then his family could have been happy without him. And it just broke my heart to hear him say that. I didn't realize the long-term effects on our kids that are living in homes where we as parents and our families allow so much stress. You know, the stress that's like that of a combat soldier, I hear. This chronic stress that is so frequent, you know. Sometimes it's once a week, sometimes it's 5 days a week, but that stress is so overwhelming for us as parents and siblings, and they feel that and they see that and they think it's them. And they think if I wasn't here, and this was what he told me, if I just hadn't been there, that stress wouldn't have been there and the family could have been happy instead of stressed out so much. And so I want to challenge you to really look at how you can lower stress and tension in your home. We don't know the effect it's having on our kids on the spectrum. In some cases, they're not the ones stressed. They're just doing what they do. We're the ones that are completely and totally stressed out in a lot of cases. And I challenge you to find a way to lower that stress so that they can feel like, to get off that autism roller coaster, so that our kids on the spectrum know that we love them. You know, just saying I love you is not enough. And that's what this young man told me. I said, well, did your parents tell you they loved you? And he said, yeah, but I mean, they're supposed to say that. They didn't show it. The stress was my fault. I don't see how they could have loved me if I was the reason for all the stress in our home. And so I want to also tell you that this Thursday, and I think at 3 o'clock Mountain Time, I'm going to be talking about battling that stress in your home and some of the things that you can do, some of the mistakes we made, and some of the breakthroughs we had that have allowed us to absolutely lower that stress. And the thing that happened to us, and has happened to so many families now, is that as you lower that stress, it's replaced with something. And that something generally is happiness and smiles and fun and joy. So I want to challenge you to do that. Join me this Thursday. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to cover 3 things that are just powerful, that we learned were very powerful in our lives. And I'll talk to you then. Have a great day. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.